The cabin air crackled like static, an invisible current of tension rippling through row after row as heads turned in unison toward the commotion. A single voice, sharp, curt, and unmistakably entitled, had pierced the gentle murmur of boarding chatter. And in its wake, silence. "I don't see why I should be inconvenienced. I want my seat. Now." It wasn't the words themselves that froze Malik Jackson's hand, mid-air phone still pressed to his ear. It was the tone, the assumption, the dismissiveness. Beside him, Zora's fingernails dug into his forearm, leaving crescent moons in his skin. She wasn't panicked. Zora never panicked, but her body spoke volumes. Malik could feel her breath catch the same way it had during dozens of other moments in their lives that weren't written down but seared into memory. The flight attendant Sandra, according to her name tag, stood in the aisle, her corporate smile now drawn tight and thin. She wasn't yelling, but her presence radiated pressure. People had stopped talking. Even the children had stilled. The hum of the engines faded behind the beating of Malik's heart. "Yes, sir," Malik said into the phone voice, steady but clipped. "We're still on the tarmac. Flight 2187 to Atlanta. I'm calling to report an incident of discrimination by a flight attendant." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm carried the weight of countless moments when he'd had to stay calm, had to stay measured, had to be the reasonable one in the face of something deeply unreasonable. "My sister and I," he continued, not blinking, as he stared at Sandra, "are being asked to surrender our seats to accommodate a passenger who arrived late. And I believe the reason we were selected is because of the color of our skin." Sandra's face flushed a shade too dark to blame on lighting. "Sir, that is absolutely not." Malik held up one finger, never breaking eye contact. "The plane is scheduled to depart in 20 minutes. I'd like to speak with the captain immediately." He could feel the gravity of the moment shift. The phrase had landed. A request that might have been dismissed from anyone else now demanded a response. Something had fractured in the carefully choreographed pre-flight routine, and no one on board, crew or passenger, could pretend not to notice. No one had expected this flight to be anything other than ordinary. Certainly not Malik. Not Zora, not Sandra, who now looked like she wished she could melt into the wall. But in the span of 60 seconds, a simple seat request had unraveled into something more, something raw, something real. And as Malik sat waiting for the answer, he knew he wouldn't get. Not yet anyway. He understood this wasn't just about seats. This was about patterns, about being told in a dozen quiet ways where you do and don't belong. His sister's voice, soft but firm, whispered beside him, "You don't have to make this call." But he did. Because if not now, when 3 hours earlier sunlight had spilled through Malik Jackson's bedroom window, warm and golden against the grey Chicago skyline. The aroma of fresh brewed coffee wound its way from the kitchen like a familiar friend, but beneath it was a more electric scent, anticipation. He zipped up his carry-on fingers, pausing for a moment on the bag's handle. After 15 years at the same architecture firm, after countless weekends missed, late nights logged, and deadlines met, Malik had finally made partner. Jackson Williams and Associates was now Jackson Williams and Jackson. Someone's humming came a voice from the doorway. Zora stood there with a mug in her hand, one eyebrow raised in amusement. She was dressed in jeans and a casual blazer, her hair pulled back, her stance confident. Always the professor, even at 34, 5 years his junior, she had a presence that filled the room with quiet certainty. "Was I?" Malik blinked. She nodded, sipping. "Must be the thrill of success. Or maybe it's the fact we finally get to celebrate with Mum and Dad." He reached for his phone to check the time. "Car should be here in 15. Zora leaned against the doorframe, tilting her head. "Before we go, there's something I need to tell you." She hesitated, just long enough for Malik to raise an eyebrow. "I got offered a position at Emory," she said, her voice softer now. "Full professorship, heading their new Center for Racial Justice Studies." Malik froze. "Atlanta. You'd be moving back home." She gave a slight shrug. "I haven't accepted yet. Northwestern's been good to me. But being so far from family during the pandemic, it changed how I measure what matters." Malik walked over and wrapped his sister in a hug. "That's amazing, Z. No matter what you decide." She rested her cheek against his shoulder. "Can you imagine the look on Dad's face when he hears about both of us?" Oh, he's going to cry. He's not going to cry, she chuckled. He's absolutely going to cry. Mum too, probably before the appetizers. By the time the car pulled up, the two were laughing like kids again, weaving through memories of childhood and adolescent missteps that now seemed like ancient myths. On the drive to O'Hare, their conversation drifted between nostalgia and nervous excitement. "Remember Dad's old brown station wagon?" Zora asked, gazing out at the Chicago skyline as it disappeared behind them. Malik groaned. "How could I forget that thing rattled like a tin can full of marbles? You hated being picked up in it." "I was in high school. It was a social death sentence." Zora smirked. "That station wagon paid for your SAT prep and your architecture camp." "True," he said, his voice gentler now. "And your violin lessons. And my first drafting table. He always had a book on the passenger seat, remember?" Malik smiled, said no one could take education from you once you had it. Inside the terminal, the airport's signature blend of chaos and routine surrounded them, snaking lines overhead. Announcements, hurried footsteps. They moved like practiced travelers, Zora gracefully removing her laptop for TSA before anyone asked Malik following suit. At the gate, Malik offered to grab breakfast. Usual lemon muffin if they've got the kind with the sugar on top. When he returned, he found Zora deep in conversation with an elderly white man. Her body language was open, her eyes engaged. "Malik, this is Harold," she said as he approached. "He's flying to Atlanta to meet his first great-granddaughter." Malik extended a hand. "Congratulations." Harold's eyes twinkled. "Sophia Elizabeth, born yesterday." He gestured at Malik's carry-on. "Your sister tells me you're an architect. My son-in-law's brother does masonry, says architects these days don't know concrete from cardboard." Malik laughed. He's not wrong. They talked until boarding began, about construction technology, grandkids, and change. As Harold tipped his imaginary hat and moved toward the plane, Zora nudged Malik with a grin. "See, not all old white men are stuck in the past." He marched with Dr. King. Apparently, she added, lowering her voice. "One conversation and you've got his biography. People want to be heard, Mal. You just have to listen." Their seats were in row 16, Zora by the window, Malik beside her with the aisle seat still empty. As Malik reached for the in-flight magazine, a distant voice cut through the cabin. Someone wasn't happy. Zora glanced up. "Late passenger." Malik shrugged. "Not our problem, but it would be, very soon." The boarding line inched forward with the usual mix of impatience and fatigue. Overhead bins clattered open and shut, flight attendants offered practice smiles, and the pilot's voice murmured over the intercom like distant thunder. Malik and Zora stepped into the cabin of Flight 2187, their steps slow but steady, eyes scanning the numbers above each row. Row 16. Seats C and D, Zora confirmed, slipping her boarding pass back into her coat pocket. Malik gestured toward the overhead compartment. "Windows all yours. I'll take middle." "Chivalrous of you," Zora said, sliding into her seat. He stashed their bags above and settled beside her, already reaching for the in-flight magazine. "Let's see if I can make it through 5 pages before the pretzels arrive." Zora rolled her eyes. "You say that every time." Before he could answer, they both heard it, a sharp voice, female, rising over the cabin noise. They couldn't catch the words, but the tone was unmistakable, entitled impatient demanding. Malik didn't even bother to look up. "Probably someone fussing about overhead space," he murmured. But Zora was watching. "No. She's with a flight attendant. Looks like she's late." "And not thrilled about it." Malik sighed. "Still not our problem." But it was. Moments later, the flight attendant, with her hair pulled into a tight regulation-perfect bun, approached their row. Sandra. Her name tag gleamed under the harsh overhead lights. She was accompanied by the woman from the front, mid-50s, sleek blonde highlights, perfectly coordinated scarf and heels clutching her purse like it held a crown. "Excuse me?" Sandra began, her tone dipped in courtesy but laced with tension. "We have a situation." "Of course you do," Malik thought. Sandra continued, "Miss Carrington here was meant to be seated with her husband, but due to a last-minute issue with her boarding pass, their seats were split. Would either of you be willing to move to 28B so they can sit together?" Malik blinked. 28B, that's near the back of the plane. It's still an aisle seat, Sandra offered quickly. Just further back. Zora's response was immediate, calm, clear. My brother and I booked these seats together weeks ago. We're traveling to a family event and need the time to go over details. We'd like to remain seated as we are. Sandra didn't blink. I understand, she said, her voice tightening, but it would really help us out. Why us? Malik asked, his voice quiet but firm. Sandra hesitated. You were the first I approached, which was almost certainly not true. Before she could say more, Miss Carrington stepped forward. I paid full price for my ticket. It's not my fault your system messed up. I should be sitting with my husband, not pushed to the back of the plane because these people won't cooperate. The words echoed like a slap in the silence that followed. These people, Zora repeated slowly, her voice like a scalpel. And what people would that be exactly? Carrington flushed. Passengers who booked together. That's all I meant. Obviously, Zora replied, tone unchanged, gaze unflinching. Sandra stepped in. Perhaps we can find another solution. No, Miss Carrington snapped. I've been a platinum member for 15 years. I'm not sitting in the back. Just have him move, she added, pointing directly at Malik. Malik's spine straightened. He rose slowly, his frame unfolding like a coiled spring. I'd like to speak with the captain before I consider giving up my seat. Sandra blinked. The captain is busy with pre-flight. Then I'll call customer service, Malik replied, and report the incident formally. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every word landed like a hammer on glass. Zora gripped his hand. Malik, you don't have to, but he already was. And just then, from the rear of the cabin, a voice spoke up. I'll switch, said Harold, standing calmly in the aisle. I'm in 28B. Doesn't bother me. Let these two stay together. The relief on Sandra's face was instant. Thank you, sir. That would be most helpful. Miss Carrington's mouth tightened. I was hoping for the aisle seat, she said, as if negotiating a business deal. Harold chuckled. Middle's all mine. I like watching the clouds. You'll get the aisle. Works out, doesn't it, checkmate? Carrington gave a reluctant nod and took her seat beside Malik, now once again in the middle. Harold settled between the siblings with a contented sigh. Now, he said brightly, as though the last few minutes had never happened, you were telling me about your research, Ms. Jackson. Malik and Zora exchanged a look over Harold's head, one part gratitude, one part exhaustion, the kind of look that said, here we go again. But for now, they had won a small battle, one of many. The cabin buzzed with resumed activity, passengers buckling in and attendants beginning their safety checks, but the energy in row 16 remained taut like a guitar string pulled too tight. Malik could feel the weight of Miss Carrington's presence beside him, her silence somehow louder than before. Her body was rigid, facing forward, fingers tapping absently against her phone. Zora leaned forward, her expression cool but composed. I hope you have a pleasant flight, she said evenly. If you need to get past us during the journey, please don't hesitate to ask. The words were perfectly polite, perhaps too polite, and the woman beside them blinked, as if surprised by the offer of civility. Thank you, she muttered after a beat, not quite making eye contact. I appreciate that. Malik had barely exhaled when Sandra returned. Her presence was unexpected, unwanted, and undeniably familiar by now, but this time she wasn't alone. Another attendant walked with her, black younger, her name tag reading Jasmine. Her posture was careful, her expression unreadable. Excuse me, Sandra said, addressing Malik and Zora. There's been another issue with the seating arrangements. Zora's back stiffened. We've already resolved this. Yes, Sandra replied, eyes darting toward the front. But we've realized Ms. Carrington has a medical condition that requires her to be seated with her companion. Her husband has agreed to give up his first-class seat to join her, but we need to seat them together in this row. Malik stared. You mean the husband who sat comfortably in first class while she tried to displace us? Sandra ignored the sarcasm. Mr. Carrington has now expressed willingness to join her in economy. That's generous of him, Zora said, her tone sharp as glass. Harold frowned. I just moved to help accommodate this situation. Now you're saying it wasn't enough. Jasmine, clearly uncomfortable, shifted her weight. I wasn't part of the earlier conversation, she said, glancing quickly at Sandra. This is ridiculous, Zora said flatly. First you ask us to move for a late passenger, then when that's resolved you invent another reason to displace us. What's really going on here? Sandra's expression darkened. We are simply trying to accommodate a medical necessity which wasn't mentioned until now. And how convenient that her husband suddenly feels inspired to downgrade his ticket, Malik muttered. He didn't seem terribly concerned earlier. The man in question, Mr. Carrington, now stood a few rows ahead, looking vaguely embarrassed. I wasn't aware of the situation until the captain informed me, he said. Malik's eyebrows lifted. So the captain is involved now, but not when I asked to speak with him. For a moment no one spoke. The absurdity hung thick in the air. Sandra drew in a breath, her voice turning firm. Sir, I'm going to have to insist that either you or your sister move. If you continue to be uncooperative, we may need to involve security. There it was, the implied threat, not stated outright but hanging there like smoke. Malik felt it hit his chest. That old, unwelcome heat and anger that was more familiar than he cared to admit. The kind of anger he'd spent years learning to bury under calm words and even calmer expressions. Because anything more would be dangerous. Anything more would be too much. He looked to Jasmine. She was silent, eyes low, torn, but then Harold stood, and just like that the tension shifted again. I'd like to speak with the captain myself, Harold said, his voice steady, cutting through the weight of the moment. Sir, Sandra protested, you need to remain seated during taxi. Then I suggest you stop the plane, Harold replied, not flinching, because what I'm witnessing appears to be discriminatory treatment of these passengers, and as a former civil rights attorney, I find it deeply concerning. Silence. Sandra paled. Jasmine's eyes widened. Even the Carringtons exchanged uneasy glances. That's a very serious accusation, Sandra managed. Yes, Harold said calmly. One I'm fully prepared to pursue through the appropriate channels. But I'd prefer we resolve it like reasonable people. So shall we call the captain? Malik's phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from Zora. Harold marched with Dr. King, and he's a civil rights lawyer. Plot twist. He almost laughed. Almost. Sandra's mouth opened, then closed. She turned without a word and headed toward the cockpit. Jasmine lingered. I'm sorry for the confusion, she said quietly. Can I get anyone a water while we sort this out? That would be lovely, Harold said, smiling like he hadn't just shaken the entire cabin to its core. And perhaps some clarification on the airline's official seating policy for my notes. As Jasmine moved off, Mr. Carrington cleared his throat. Perhaps I should return to my seat until this is resolved. Perhaps you should, Zora said, her voice cold as glass. Left alone with Miss Carrington, the silence in row 16 returned. But this time it wasn't tense, it was loaded. Harold leaned back, entirely unbothered. Malik sat still, watching it all unfold, and Zora simply waited, because she knew it wasn't over yet. The minutes crawled by, each second pulsing with quiet indignation and suppressed energy. The aircraft remained firmly on the tarmac, its engines humming idly while confusion rippled across the cabin. Murmurs fluttered like wind through wheat passengers, craning their necks toward row 16, unsure of what had caused the delay but sensing it was no ordinary mechanical issue. Then at last, the captain's voice broke through the low din. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds speaking. We're experiencing a slight delay due to some administrative issues. We should be underway shortly. Flight attendants, please prepare for a brief meeting in the galley. The message was short. The subtext was not. Moments later, Sandra and Jasmine disappeared down the aisle toward the rear. What followed was a brief but unmistakably heated exchange. Though too far to hear words, their body language said enough. Sandra gestured with a tight jaw and sharp hands. Jasmine nodded reluctantly, clearly caught in the gravitational pull of two conflicting duties, professional loyalty and personal ethics. When they returned, it was Jasmine who approached their row. Mr. Jackson, Miss Jackson, she said softly, the captain would like to speak with you. Malik exchanged a glance with his sister. Both of us, yes, Jasmine nodded, and Mr. Harold Jensen as well, if he's willing. Harold immediately stood, always happy to chat with the person in charge. As they made their way toward the cockpit, Malik could feel the eyes of nearly every passenger following them, some sympathetic, others annoyed at the delay, still others watching with the wide-eyed curiosity reserved for unfolding drama. The narrow aisle stretched like a gauntlet. Captain Reynolds met them just outside the cockpit. Tall, broad-shouldered, silver at the temples, he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who'd handled mid-air emergencies and thunderstorm reroutes without blinking. But now his expression was composed, bordering on grim. Mr. and Ms. Jackson. Mr. Jensen, he greeted each with a firm handshake. I understand there's been confusion regarding your seating. I'd like to hear your perspective directly. Malik appreciated the straightness of the ask. It's more than confusion, Captain. We were targeted twice. First, we were asked to move to accommodate a late passenger. Then, after another traveler stepped up to resolve it, new reasoning appeared, and the same request returned under a different pretext. I see, the captain said evenly. Mr. Jensen, I witnessed the entire interaction, Harold said, his tone clipped and loyally now. I offered to switch seats to resolve the issue. The crew initially accepted the offer, only to renege with a vague explanation about medical necessity. The justifications kept changing, and they were consistently aimed at the same two passengers. That raises red flags. Captain Reynolds nodded slowly. Miss Jackson Zora stepped forward with her usual poise. This is textbook bias, she said, calm but assertive. The requests came under the guise of logistics, but the pattern was familiar: selective inconvenience, escalating pressure, and the implicit threat of authority when resistance was met. We're used to this, but that doesn't make it acceptable. The captain turned to Jasmine. You were present for part of this. What did you observe? Jasmine hesitated. Her eyes flicked toward Sandra, still watching from the galley. I arrived after the initial request, sir, but I did witness that another passenger, Mr. Jensen, had already volunteered to switch, despite that Ms. Jackson and Mr. Jackson were again asked to move. That's not how we typically handle seating disputes. There was silence. Heavy, deliberate. The dignity and safety of every passenger is my responsibility, Captain Reynolds finally said. If there's even the appearance of discriminatory treatment on my aircraft, it's something I must address. He turned back to Malik and Zora. I owe you both an apology. What happened here was not handled appropriately, and I will be filing a formal report. Zora inclined her head. Thank you, Captain. I need to make a decision about this flight. Reynolds continued. We have a few options. You can remain in your seats, and the Carringtons will be reseated on another flight. Or if you feel uncomfortable continuing on this aircraft, we'll arrange alternate transport with full compensation. Malik didn't hesitate. We'd like to get to Atlanta, Captain. We have family waiting. Zora added, we only ask for assurance that this targeting won't continue. You have my word, the captain replied, and I'll be addressing this with my crew immediately. He then turned to Harold. Would you be willing to return to your original seat? Harold grinned. Certainly, though I will miss the conversation in row 16. Perhaps Miss Jackson can continue educating me during beverage service. The tension dissolved just slightly. As they prepared to return to their seats, Captain Reynolds placed a hand gently on Malik's shoulder. I understand you requested to speak with me earlier and were denied. That in itself is unacceptable. My door, or curtain as it were, is open. Malik nodded. Thank you for hearing us. Back at their row, Sandra stood stiffly as she informed the Carringtons of the new arrangements. Mr. Carrington would return to first class. Ms. Carrington would remain beside Malik and Zora. Harold returned to 28B. As everyone resettled, the intercom clicked again. This is Captain Reynolds. I'd like to apologize for the delay. We'll be departing shortly. I also want to remind all passengers that this airline has zero tolerance for discrimination of any kind. Every traveler on board is entitled to respect and dignity. If you witness or experience otherwise, please don't hesitate to ask to speak with me directly. There was a ripple of murmurs across the plane, some approving, some uneasy. Malik caught Jasmine's eye as she passed. Trasier. She gave him a small, respectful nod, and in that simple gesture he felt just briefly that something had shifted. Beside him, Miss Carrington, now visibly subdued, stared forward, hands folded tightly in her lap. Then slowly she turned. I want to be clear, she said, her voice low. I never intended any discrimination. I just wanted to sit with my husband. Malik didn't flinch. I understand wanting to sit with family, he replied. So did we. She gave a faint, grudging nod, and for the first time since boarding, she said nothing else. As the aircraft finally began taxiing away from the gate, a strange quiet settled over row 16. It wasn't peace exactly, more like a hush after a storm when the sky hasn't quite decided whether to clear or rage again. Malik leaned back in his seat, eyes closed briefly. He could feel Zora exhale beside him, her tension bleeding slowly into the fabric of the seat. Then came her voice, light but deliberate. "I noticed your wedding ring earlier," she said, directing her words toward the woman seated beside Malik. "It's beautiful. Art Deco, right?" Miss Carrington looked over, clearly surprised. Her fingers instinctively curled over the ring as she glanced down at it. "Yes, actually, it was my grandmother's." "How did you know?" "I did my doctoral research on material culture," Zora replied, her tone disarmingly warm. "Jewelry tells us more about generational identity and social values than most people realize." There was a beat of quiet. "That sounds interesting," Miss Carrington admitted, a little guarded, a little curious. "It is," Zora said, "especially when you study what people choose to preserve across time. Family heirlooms often reflect unspoken stories, what was cherished, what was endured." Malik tilted his head, catching the subtle shift in the atmosphere. Zora had stepped off the battlefield and into the seminar room, and she had brought Carrington with her. "My family's been in Boston for generations," Carrington offered cautiously. "Sometimes I forget that not everyone's roots are planted in the same place or the same soil." "My grandparents came up from Mississippi," Malik said. "Part of the Great Migration. They didn't talk much about why they left, but later I learned sometimes silence is its own kind of history." Miss Carrington didn't respond right away. Then she said, "My husband's family is from Georgia. His grandfather ran a pharmacy in Atlanta, one of the only white-owned businesses that served black customers during segregation." Zora nodded slowly. That was progressive for the time. Though still within a deeply unjust system, she added, her voice soft but unflinching. Miss Carrington's jaw tensed, but she didn't disagree. He did what he could, within the limits of what was. Malik jumped in gently. Many people did. "It's those small moments of courage that built the bridge we're all walking on now." There was a long pause, the kind that didn't need to be filled. "We're heading to Atlanta for our parents' 50th wedding anniversary," Malik said, redirecting the flow. "They've been through a lot, sacrificed more than we can ever repay." Miss Carrington looked over, her expression softening. 50 years. That's something. "Any advice from someone who's made it past 30? Malik asked with a smile. She considered. "Choose someone who makes you laugh, especially when you're angry. And if you can afford it, separate bathrooms." Zora burst into a quiet laugh, genuine and surprised. Even Malik cracked a grin. "Noted," he said. Their drinks arrived. Jasmine was back, and she served each of them with quiet efficiency. Her smile to the Jacksons was genuine, to Miss Carrington polite. "Tomato juice, please." "No ice," Carrington said. As she accepted the drink, she glanced at Jasmine, then Malik. "Sandra's not a bad person," she said. "We've flown together often. She's always been courteous to me." Zora arched an eyebrow. "To you?" Miss Carrington flushed. "I didn't mean, you meant she hasn't shown signs of bias in your experience," Zora clarified. "But most discrimination isn't loud or intentional. It's unconscious, a pattern of choices that when stitched together tell a different story." "You think she targeted you because of your race?" Carrington asked, her voice cautious but no longer defensive. "I don't think," Zora said. "I know what patterns look like. It's what I teach." "I'm sure your research is thorough," Carrington said, stiffening again. "But not everyone's a case study." "Actually," Zora said evenly, "we all are. We're all data points in each other's reality." The air turned sharp again, the kind that could break fragile truce. Malik leaned forward, redirecting quickly. "Zora was just offered a position at Emory," he said. "Might be moving back to Atlanta." Miss Carrington perked up. "Emory's campus is beautiful in spring. My niece graduated from their law school last year. She loved it." And just like that, the tension shifted again. As the drink service continued down the aisle, the conversation stayed afloat, never too personal, never too political, but threaded with fragments of shared humanity. Grandchildren, teaching, city neighborhoods, favorite southern meals. They weren't becoming friends, but something more subtle was happening. They were becoming real to each other. About halfway through the flight, Harold returned from row 28 with the energy of someone who refused to stay in his seat when there was a story unfolding. Mind if I interrupt? He asked cheerfully. I've got new baby photos. Zora smiled and shifted to let him stand beside them. Let's see her. He held up his phone. Look at this little angel, 1 day old and already got her great-grandmother's eyes. They all leaned in. You know, Harold said, eyes still on the screen, I've been thinking about this flight. Reminds me that progress isn't a straight line. Sometimes you stumble forward, sometimes you leap. But the direction, that's what matters. Zora nodded slowly. Even small progress matters. All progress starts small, Harold replied, slipping the phone back into his pocket. Then he looked at Carrington. Sophia Elizabeth, he said, named after my late wife. Carrington's voice when it came was quiet. That's a lovely tribute. Harold smiled, and a reminder that every conversation, especially the hard ones, is worth having. He winked at Zora, then patted Malik's shoulder. I'll let you three get back to it. But don't think you're off the hook, Professor Jackson. That research of yours, that needs to be in every classroom. Zora blinked. How did you... I connect dots, he said with a wink and disappeared back toward Coach. Miss Carrington watched him go, then turned back to the siblings. He's quite a character, he is, Malik agreed, and a good reminder that allies come in all forms. Her face turned thoughtful. I've never really thought of myself as an ally, I've just lived my life. Zora tilted her head. That's privilege, the ability to live without needing to question how the system affects you or others. Carrington didn't flinch this time. Instead, she asked, do you teach your students to lead with words like that? Zora blinked. I didn't mean it as an accusation. It felt like one Carrington said. And if you're trying to teach, sometimes how you say something matters more than what you say. There was a pause. Zora looked out the window, then back. That's fair. Precision matters, but so does grace. For the first time, Carrington nodded without bristling. My daughter's a social worker. She tells me the same thing. Constantly. Malik smiled. Chicago Carrington raised an eyebrow. Southside Family Services, trauma-informed care for youth. Zora and Malik exchanged a look. David Mercer volunteers there, Zora said. That's my partner. Carrington's eyes widened. Tall guy, always in colorful sneakers. That's him. Well, I'll be damned. Small world, Malik said. Smaller than we think. The remaining hours of the flight unfolded like the soft turning of pages, quiet, deliberate, and unexpected. The tension that had once wrapped around row 16 like a taut wire had loosened, replaced by something tentative, fragile, but undeniably human. Miss Carrington, Eleanor as they now knew her, began to talk more openly. Not just about her husband or her frustrations at the gate, but about her work as a hospital administrator, about her grandchildren, and about the changing dynamics of her workplace as more young professionals of color joined her team. She didn't always get the words right, but she was trying. Malik, sipping his coffee, listened without correcting or confronting. Zora, more measured, still navigated every sentence, like a surgeon, precise, cautious, but occasionally letting warmth slip through the cracks of her academic discipline. You ever feel like the world's just shifting beneath your feet? Elena asked at one point, her eyes distant. Like things you thought were normal just aren't anymore, all the time, Malik said. The difference is, for us, they were never really normal to begin with. Just something we had to adapt to. That gave her pause. She nodded slowly. Before the conversation could drift back into silence, Harold returned once more, moving with surprising energy down the aisle, despite the turbulence beginning to rattle the cabin. He leaned in, grinning. Mind if I steal a minute? Always, Zora teased, gesturing toward the aisle. I've been thinking, Harold said, pulling out his phone. This experience, everything from the confrontation to the compromise, it's a perfect case study. You could use it at Emory. Zora laughed. I didn't even tell you the full title of the center. You didn't have to, Harold winked. You mentioned racial justice and academic work. Emory just launched a center with that focus. Easy connection. You're a surprisingly observant man, Elena remarked. It comes with being underestimated, he replied, not missing a beat. People drop their guard around old men with canes. He tapped the cane on the floor for emphasis. Malik chuckled. So what are you going to give our parents as an anniversary gift? An essay? A class syllabus? Harold's eyes twinkled. A toast. Stories are the best gifts, and today's given me one worth telling. They laughed together, the four of them. Zora resting her chin on her hand, Eleanor smiling despite herself, Malik shaking his head at Harold's effortless charm. As Harold made his way back once more, Eleanor turned to Malik, quieter now. He's remarkable, he is, Malik agreed, and a reminder that allyship doesn't have an age limit or a dress code. I've never thought of myself as an ally, she said again, almost as if confessing something. Zora turned to her, her voice gentler than before. You don't need a title, just a choice, to speak when it's easier to be silent, to listen when it's easier to dismiss. Elena stared down at her hands. I didn't speak up earlier. I let Sandra handle everything. You weren't the only one, Malik replied, not unkindly. Most people didn't. And yet Zora added, we're still here, talking. That's something. Elena considered that. Do you think people can really change? Zora nodded. I think people can reflect. And I think reflection leads to change. The captain's voice came over the speaker again. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final descent into Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. The weather in Atlanta is currently 78 degrees and sunny. Thank you for flying with us. There was a pause. Then unexpectedly he continued. And thank you for your patience earlier. Sometimes the journey is as important as the destination. And today reminded me that the most important flights aren't measured in miles, but in understanding. The cabin fell into a thoughtful hush. Elena looked at them both. Did you say something to him? Malik smiled faintly. Not a word. Sounds like he drew his own conclusions. They fastened their seatbelts as the city came into view through the window. Familiar streets, gleaming glass buildings, winding highways they'd traveled 100 times. I owe you both an apology, Eleanor said quietly, not just for the seat, for how I responded. My tone, my assumptions, my defensiveness. Malik looked at her serious but not harsh. We've all had bad days. It's what we learn from them that matters. She nodded. My daughter would say the same thing, probably more bluntly. Zora smiled. Smart daughter. The wheels touched down smoothly, the plane bouncing slightly before settling into its glide. Passengers began shifting in their seats, collecting phones, tapping into texts. Elena's phone buzzed. She glanced down. Richard's waiting at baggage claim, she said. Malik reached under the seat for his carry-on. Our parents should be at arrivals. You'll recognize them. They'll be the ones with a giant homemade sign. Elena laughed. I'm not surprised. As the plane taxied to the gate, Sandra stood at the door offering polite farewells to the disembarking passengers. When Malik and Zora approached her, smile flickered. Not quite guilt, not quite pride, but something in between. Thank you for flying with us today, she said. Thank you for your service, Malik replied, his tone neutral, professional. Jasmine, standing just behind, caught Malik's eye. She gave a small, firm thumbs up. Malik returned it with a quiet smile. And then just before they entered the jet bridge, Harold reappeared. His cane tapping softly on the floor, his smile wide. Thought I'd walk out with my row 16 companions, he said. Zora beamed. We'd be honored. Malik offered an arm. Harold accepted it with dignity. Together the three of them moved through the terminal. And for the first time that day, Malik didn't feel like he was navigating someone else's world. He felt like he was walking toward home. The fluorescent lights of the terminal bathed everything in a dull glow, but for Malik, Zora, and Harold, the atmosphere felt anything but dim. Their pace was unhurried, unbothered by the tide of passengers weaving around them. There was something grounding about the moment, something earned. So Harold asked, his voice carrying the faint rasp of age, softened by wit. What will you tell your parents about this flight? Malik and Zora glanced at each other and spoke in unison. Everything. They burst into laughter, the kind that comes from shared survival and sibling telepathy. Zora linked her arm with Harold's on one side and Malik's on the other. Our parents raised us to tell the truth, she said. Even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable, Malik added. Harold nodded thoughtfully. Wise people. I look forward to meeting them. You should come to the celebration, Zora said, surprising even herself. Saturday evening. West Side Cultural Center. Dinner dancing. Too many speeches. Harold looked genuinely touched. That's very kind of you, but I wouldn't want to intrude on a family event. You're not intruding, Malik said. You helped us stand our ground today. That makes you family. Well, when you put it that way, Harold smiled. I'd be delighted to attend. Sophia, my great-granddaughter, will be getting all the attention anyway. Her parents won't even notice I'm missing for a night. As they neared the terminal exit, Malik spotted them. His father, tall, dignified, his salt-and-pepper hair, combed neatly, posture upright, despite the decades of hard work behind him. His mother, petite but commanding, dressed in bright colors that somehow made everyone around her seem muted. In their hands, a homemade sign in bold marker that read, "Welcome home, our pride and joy." Zora let out a gasp and waved both arms like a kid. "There they are," Malik said, voices catching in his throat. He felt it building, that familiar tightness of emotion that always arrived when he saw them again. No matter how successful he became, no matter how far he traveled, this moment always brought him back to center. Harold followed their gaze. "Ah," he said with a smile, "now I see where you get your presents, Mr. Jackson, and your smile, Miss Jackson." Their parents rushed forward, embracing them in tight, tearful hugs. Their mother kissed both of their cheeks in rapid succession. Their father, never one for public displays, didn't even try to hold back. "And who's this?" their mother asked, turning to Harold. "This," Malik said, "is the man who made sure we didn't give up our seats." Harold chuckled. Harold Jensen, civil rights attorney, retired, defender of Row 16. Zora added, "and now official guest of Saturday's celebration." Their parents shook his hand with heartfelt gratitude, exchanging contact information right there on the terminal floor, already asking about his favorite desserts. As they walked toward the parking garage, Malik stayed close to Harold. The questions Harold asked were quiet ones, but they reached somewhere deep. "Your sister's center, this new initiative at Emory, do you think it'll make a difference?" Malik nodded slowly. "If anyone can translate academic theory into real-world action, it's Zora." Harold paused. "And your work, your architecture," Malik blinked, caught off guard. I'm designing a community center on the south side. It'll have affordable housing, daycare spaces for small businesses." He hesitated. "It's not changing the world, but it's something. It's everything," Harold said, his tone suddenly reverent. "Don't ever underestimate the power of a place where people can gather, grow, and feel safe. Neighborhoods make up cities, and cities shape nations." They reached the car where Malik's father was already holding open the back door. He beamed as he watched his children walk toward him, upright, united, and radiant with purpose. And in that moment, Malik saw it. He saw the culmination of every sacrifice his parents had ever made. The late shifts, the second jobs, the missed vacations, all of it had built this path, had led to this airport, this flight, this moment. Flight 2187 had been delayed, but the real journey toward justice, toward understanding, toward dignity, had lifted off in its place. As they all climbed into the car, Harold settled in beside Zora and glanced at Malik one last time. His voice was low but firm. "You know," he said, "what you did today, refusing to give up your seat, not just physically, but symbolically. That was a stand." He placed a hand gently on Malik's shoulder. "Sometimes, son, keeping your seat is the most revolutionary act of all." The ride through Atlanta was bathed in the soft amber hue of early evening, the city's skyline a blend of glass, brick, and memory. From the back seat, Malik watched the familiar streets slip past the window, places he'd known since childhood, now layered with the silent weight of new perspective. His parents chatted animatedly with Harold, catching him up on plans for the celebration, the catering menu, the playlist, the speech Zora was pretending not to write. His mother kept turning around in her seat, excitement bubbling over, delighted to welcome this unexpected guest into their circle. And in the quiet between conversations, Malik reflected. The flight had started as a routine journey, a celebration waiting at the other end. But somewhere between O'Hare and Hartsfield-Jackson, something more profound had taken shape. A confrontation, yes, but also a connection, resistance, and then recognition. It wasn't just about keeping their seats, it was about keeping their voice. As the car pulled up in front of the family home, a warm two-story house with flower beds carefully tended by their father and wind chimes tinkling near the porch, Zora reached for Harold's arm. "Come in," she said. "Just for a bit." Harold hesitated. "I wouldn't want to intrude." "Nonsense," their mother said, already opening the front door. "You're part of this story now. Inside, the scent of simmering spices and lemon polish filled the air. Framed photos lined the mantel, birthdays, graduations, wedding anniversaries. Their younger selves stared back from decades-old prints, laughing in matching denim or grinning from behind science fair boards. Harold paused at one photo in particular, a black-and-white image of their father in a postal uniform, standing beside the very station wagon they'd laughed about earlier. "He delivered for 40 years, Zora said, noticing Harold's gaze, "in more ways than one." Malik laughed. "That car got more mileage than some airplanes." Their father smiled from the kitchen. "That car sent you to college." They all laughed, but the truth in his words settled deep. Over dinner, the conversations continued, some light, some weighty. Harold recounted bits of his career, cases he'd won, battles he'd lost, and moments that still haunted him. He spoke with a quiet authority, not boastful, but rooted in lived history. Malik listened, feeling something shift inside him. For years, architecture had been his passion, his purpose. But today had shown him that blueprints weren't just about buildings. They were about spaces, about justice, about who was allowed to enter and who was asked to move. As the sky darkened and dessert was served, Zora disappeared for a moment, returning with a laptop. She opened a folder titled Emery Proposal, Working Draft. "Want to hear something?" she asked, looking at Harold. He raised his glass. "Always." She began reading not a lecture, not a paper, but a vision. Of classrooms filled with dialogue, of community partnerships that moved beyond theory, of a generation raised not just to understand inequality, but to undo it. And when she finished, there was a pause. Then Harold clapped. Not loud, not for effect, but with the conviction of someone who had waited decades to see seeds bloom. That, he said softly, is the kind of future I fought for. Later, as Harold prepared to leave, he stood by the front door with his coat draped over one arm. "You've given me hope today," he said. "More than you know." "You gave us the same," Malik replied. Harold looked between them, his gaze settling on Zora. "That center you're building, it won't be just an academic one. It'll be sacred." "Don't forget that." "I won't," Zora said. He turned to Malik. "And your center in Chicago, don't let anyone tell you that placemaking isn't activism." "I won't either." Harold stepped outside, the night air cool against his face. Before walking to his rideshare, he paused. "One more thing," he said, his eyes twinkling. "Your parents, they raised revolutionaries. Gentle ones, but revolutionaries nonetheless." As his car disappeared down the street, Malik and Zora stood silently on the porch. Behind them, light spilled from the windows, the sound of their father's humming and their mother's laughter wrapping around them like a blessing. In front of them, the city spread out beneath the stars. Neither said a word. They didn't need to. Some journeys don't end when the plane lands. Some continue with every step that follows. The next evening, the West Side Cultural Center shimmered with soft jazz and warm light. Rows of round tables were draped in ivory linens, and strings of fairy lights floated above like stars brought down to bless the occasion. Family, friends, neighbors, and colleagues had all gathered to celebrate 50 years of love, resilience, and quiet power. At the front of the room, a slideshow flickered with old photographs, faded images of young love. First apartments, graduation ceremonies, baby cribs, Sunday picnics, and family road trips in the infamous brown station wagon. Malik stood off to the side, his suit crisp, a glass in hand. Zora was across the room, deep in conversation with a small group of faculty friends who had flown in to surprise her. Their parents moved from table to table, like royalty, accepting congratulations and teasing stories with the grace of people who had earned every wrinkle and every laugh line. Then Harold arrived. Not in a suit, but in a dark navy blazer with his signature cane and a white rose pinned to his lapel. The room quieted slightly when he entered. Something about him commanded respect without asking for it. Malik crossed the floor and clasped his hand. "Glad you made it. I gave Sophia my blessings to dominate the rest of the family's attention tonight." Harold grinned. Seemed fair. Later in the evening, after the dancing had begun and the first round of toasts had been made, Zora tapped a spoon to her glass and took the microphone. "I could give you a speech about my parents' love story." She began smiling warmly toward them, "but I think the best way to honor them is to share what they taught us, not just through words, but by example." She paused, scanning the crowd. "They taught us to show up, to speak up, to sit tall even when the world tries to shrink you, and to love fiercely not just the people who love you back, but also the ones who don't understand you yet. Applause rippled across the room, but Zora raised a hand, and tonight we have someone with us who reminded us of that in a very unexpected way. Mr. Harold Jensen, would you join me? Surprised, Harold slowly made his way to the front as the room clapped. Zora handed him the mic. I'm not one for speeches, Harold began. But I'm old, so you'll forgive me if I pretend that means I've earned the right to give one. Laughter bubbled through the room. I want to say this: standing your ground doesn't always mean yelling. Sometimes it just means not moving from your principles, not moving from your seat, and definitely not moving from your worth. He looked toward Malik and Zora. These two, they taught me something yesterday. They reminded me that the fight for dignity never really ends, it just changes form. He turned to the audience, and if you're sitting here tonight thinking, what would I have done on that plane? Don't just wonder. Do something, speak up, offer your seat, or refuse to give it up. But whatever you do, don't stay silent. There was a long silence after he finished, an emotional stillness that no one dared break too soon. Then Malik stepped forward, raising his glass. To the next 50 years of justice, joy, and never shrinking to fit someone else's comfort. Glasses clinked, hearts stirred, and somewhere beyond the warm lights and shared laughter, the real journey, the one that had begun with a single denied seat, continued on. Not in protest, not in anger, but in purpose. Because every flight has turbulence. But not every flight becomes a legacy. Thank you for watching this story. If it moved you, sparked reflection, or reminded you of the power in standing your ground, share it, speak about it, and most importantly, live it. Comment below. What would you have done on Flight 2187? And remember, sometimes keeping your seat is the most powerful stand you'll ever take.